All right, fellas, welcome back to the show. Today, I'm joined by my new friend, Dr. Michael Thompson, married 42 years, father of 2 grown children, and the grandfather of 3. And for nearly 50 years on a professional level, Dr. Michael Thompson has worked as a clinical psychologist, school consultant, and international speaker on the subjects of children's schools and parenting. He authored 10 books, which gives me anxiety just to think about, because writing one for me was one of the most brutal 3-year projects of my life. He's written about the emotional life of boys. This really caught my attention, and I often wrestle personally with how do we balance tender versus tough? How much do I get involved, and how much do I allow my kid to just go through life and experience it on his own, or with his friends, or with his mentors and guides? Michael has written about friendships and social cruelty in childhood. He's written about the impact of summer camp experiences on childhood development. And this is actually how I found Michael's work, because as Tiger, my 13-year-old, was heading off for a 3-week adventure in Nepal and India, our community read one of his books, Homesick and Happy. And I was so impressed by that book that I then went down the Dr. Michael Thompson rabbit hole and found all of his other work, and also a documentary called Raising Cain, which was an incredible film that I found, and I started watching, and that dug into subjects like violence and boys, and when is it normal, and part of their early childhood development, and when might it be unhealthy. That was fascinating, so I shared that within the Front Row Dad Brotherhood, our private membership. He's also written about the tensions that arise between parent-teacher relationships, which I think is fascinating, as I've seen that play out, and I can understand why there's tension. So, how might we find the best schools, the best guides, the best teachers? When are we being too controlling, and when do we just need to let go? Michael's appeared on the Today Show, Oprah, 2020, CBS's 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, all of that. And so years of experience. And I love talking to dads that are in the mix. They just got started. They've got a 1-year-old. They're in the heat of the battle. They're just getting started. There's a lot of wisdom there because of the relevance. There's also tremendous wisdom of having 5 decades of experience in space and being married and a father and a grandfather. And I like talking with men who carry that wisdom and are willing to share. So Dr. Michael Thompson, welcome to the Front Row Dads podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
And I hope you'll call me Michael from here on out, right, Jon?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, Michael, let me begin here. My heart is being called to ask you, what is alive for you right now in your life? What is getting you excited and waking up with passion in the morning right now?
Well, I'm back in schools. I'm in my mid-70s, so at the beginning of the pandemic, I read that I was at high risk. I took that seriously, and my wife and I didn't. We were sequestered, and I didn't go back into schools until last April. So that was really 2 years of not traveling, not standing up in front of a student audience. And I can remember vividly, I went to the Gilman School for Boys in Baltimore, and I was their first speaker, their first week that they were mask optional. Had somewhere between 500 and 700 boys in an assembly hall. And I started talking to them about the impact of the pandemic on their mental health, and got a lot of testimony from boys about working through feelings of isolation and sadness, the likes of which they'd never encountered in their life. And what a struggle it was, and how much stronger they felt as a result. Wish they hadn't had to do it, but feeling more resilient and tougher by the end of it. I went down to a school in Winter Park, Florida, Trinity Prep, and also did their first assembly. I don't know whether your listeners have the experience of standing up in front of 500 high school kids, but I find it absolutely exhilarating. I take a mic, I walk into the audience, I get a conversation going. I ask them how much sleep they had, how worried they are about college, what will happen if they're turned down at their first choice college, what's the long-term impact on their life. I just start firing questions at them. And I have the ability to maybe I learned it from Phil Donahue many decades ago, but I have the ability to get a whole audience of kids involved in a discussion. And I just find it terrific fun.
Mm.
And I'm so glad to be back doing it. I'm so glad to be visiting schools again. It's a pleasure for me.
I don't know many people that would say standing in front of 500 kids that age would be exhilarating, more terrifying. And I think they would be fearful of how to connect. But it sounds like your approach is just by being curious. Is that safe to say?
Yes, if you ask questions of kids that are respectful and serious, and here's the most important thing. And Dan and I wrote about this in Raising Cain, the last chapter, Raising Cain. We said use boys as consultants on their own lives. That is, ask questions that only that boy can answer. And he knows that he's the only one that can answer it. And ask questions that lead to a conversation. So let me give you an example. Fathers very often ask, how are things going in math? Now, what a boy hears is, tell your father a story of high grades, a happy story of high grades. Everything that the boy hears is, this is evaluation, this is my dad benchmarking me, and it closes him down, right? But if you say, do you like your math teacher, Ms. Anderson, better than your math teacher, Mr. Bailey, last year? There's only one person who can answer that question, which is your boy. And he's more likely to answer that. The other, he feels judged. But when you ask him to compare two teachers, he feels respected. I'm a student. I have opinions about my teachers. So ask questions that use, and I'm saying boys because I put it in a book on the psychology of boys, but this is absolutely true for girls as well. You want to ask teenagers questions that on which they are the experts, because it's about their life. And it's not a pre-programmed question where you're trying to elicit a particular response. Or if you are, and I sometimes do it in assembly where I'm searching for something, I just own that. I put my cards on the table. I'm looking for a particular answer here. Can somebody think of it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to always, with teenagers, work in the open.
Yeah. I've really wrestled with this. It hit me recently that I felt like I was losing my connection with my 13-year-old Tiger. When we were in the car, I would ask questions, and I realized that I would ask a question and he would give me an answer. And then I would try to remain curious. I would try to stay in the question mode, but really I was in the coaching mode. And why do you think that happened? And what do you think you could have done about that? And do you think they felt, upset? And it was really a lot of criticism in my questions. There was a lot of like, hey, I'm trying to get you to see that there's a better path than what you took. And I'm pretending to be curious, but I'm really coaching you. How does one begin to master that? Because I can imagine I'm feeling this, and I imagine others would feel it. You just gave a very specific question. Do you like this teacher perhaps more than this other teacher? And I'm betting that men are saying, give me more questions. How else can I do that? How do I manage my own emotions as a father so I don't go into coach mode per se, but genuinely curious, genuinely giving them, the consulting ability for their own life?
So I'm going to tell you a piece of research, and right at this moment, I can't remember the author because the piece of research is more than 30 years old, but it really affected me. That came out of the University of Illinois, and it was when people first had beepers, and they did research where they gave adolescents beepers is the wrong word. What were the early things?
Pagers?
What?
The pagers?
Thank you. Not beepers, pagers. They gave teenagers pagers, and then they gave their parents pagers, and then the computer paged them randomly. What are you doing and how are you feeling? What are you doing? How are you feeling? And they hit a number of times when a teenage boy was talking to his father, and the father would say, I'm teaching my son something and the father would report that he's incredibly happy. Dads love to teach their sons things, and they report that that's one of the happier moments for them.
Yeah.
And the son would say, who would beep at the same time, he'd say, my father's lecturing me.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Exactly.
So you had this total mismatch of the father's experience and the son's experience. But here's the other interesting thing. Sometimes they beep the page, a teenage boy, and he would say he was incredibly happy. He was teaching his father something. Oh, how about that? A teenage boy loves to be able to show his father that he knows some stuff and he can demonstrate it to his dad. But the dad loves to teach and coach, just what you're talking about, John. And this is a dilemma for most dads and sons and dads and daughters as well. But if you have it in your mind that your teenager, some of their happiest moments is when they're teaching you, when they're showing you what they can do, that will quell your need to constantly coach, even though it makes you happy to do it.
I'm wondering if the question, would you teach me something, if that would land, or maybe that's too broad. Maybe that gives them too much to choose from. Yeah.
The other thing when you're driving in a car with kids is to ask questions that are concrete and specific and where the answer is finite. The mistake that mothers make is they ask all these emotional laden questions that are open-ended. How are you feeling? How are things? How are your friendships, right? I mean, one 14-year-old said to me that there's no point in talking to my mom. I said, why not? And he said, no matter how much I talk, it's never enough for her. She's always disappointed that I don't say more. So if you can have a conversation, it's particularly true with boys, but with any teenager, where you give them ask for something where there's a concrete answer, a specific answer, and it's time limited, then they know they can satisfy the parental curiosity, the constant, give me more, give me more. That's annoying to all teenagers.
What would be a couple other examples, if you have them, of questions that we could ask that you've seen be successful, both in your audiences and with your kids or with other men and their children?
You can observe something about your son. Boy examples are coming to me. Do you know that I'm the consultant, have been for 28 years for at the Belmont Hill School?
Yes.
And so I just have more boy stories than girl stories.
No, that's good. And I think it's okay for us just to focus on boys right now too, because we'll do shows that just focus on girls as well. So that's fine.
Well, my granddaughters will be mad, but I'll focus on boys for the moment. What if you say to an 11th grader, I don't think you're enjoying baseball as much as you did last year. If that's a valid observation, you can make it brief, and that's genuine curiosity, because maybe he is enjoying it, but you're not seeing it, or maybe he's not enjoying it, and your observation is correct. But if you make an observation, he knows your eyes are on him. He knows you love him. At the same time, you're not presuming to understand the why or the what of it. You're asking him for that. So just an observation.
So it's just beginning anything with, hey, it appears to me. It feels to me like that's, we've studied the 15 commitments of conscious leadership, Jim Dethmer's work. And one of the pieces of his work, and not that he invented this, but he teaches it, is the idea of starting things with the story that I'm telling myself is.
Yes.
And when I did work with Tony Robbins, it was, my hallucination is.
Yes.
But it's really just saying that my observation, which may or may not be true, is this.
Yes.
Yeah. Sharing an observation.
Then you can let your teenage son set you straight.
Yeah.
Or you can say, yeah, it's kind of like that, Dad.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. I'm finding it harder to motivate myself in baseball this year than I did earlier. Why would that happen? Well, not everybody's going to play college sports. Not everybody falls ever more deeply in love with their sport. But many fathers in their coaching heart, want their son's commitment to something that he's been committed. My goodness, you've been playing baseball since you were 7, right? Your commitment should deepen and become broader and stronger, because that's better practice for life. Rubbish. Most people give up sports after high school. That's it. They see the end. They know they don't have the talent to go on and play college sports. So all you have to do is look at the stats, how many high school players go on to play in college. So I see many boys. I work at a highly athletic school, and we're an athletic powerhouse. And many of our boys do go off to college and play sports, but most don't. And they see the end coming, and they're thinking more complicated thoughts about their future. An observation like that could possibly lead to a conversation about the future. If, as a father, however, you say, well, I hope you'll maintain your commitment, son, because once you've made a commitment and the coach is counting on you, then you're lecturing. Then you're lecturing, and you're going to lose them.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about tender versus tough, which I kind of seeded in the beginning. And for context here, I want to share my own personal observation in my family. So my son, Tiger, again, who's 13, he's an actor. He wants to grow up to be an actor. So he's in this theater company, and he's very good, right?
Yeah.
And I get it. Like, he's rehearsing, practicing lines. He's massive amounts of courage to stand on stage in front of hundreds of people and sing and perform and know his lines, right? Yeah. He then takes voice lessons. He's taking dance classes. He is, right? He's also, in his school, the first hour and a half of every day is you either climb or you go to the YMCA and shoot basketball or lift weights. Like, it's a great program. And then we do active things as a family as well. But sometimes I look at his schedule and I say, man, that feels full, feels like he's doing a lot. I'd love for him to have space. And at the same time, he's not getting currently the benefit of playing on a basketball team or a football team, or right. And then, well, he's not doing jujitsu and martial arts. So can he really defend himself? But he's not also focused on an instrument because he's just right. And I start to get into this place of fear where I'm like, if he doesn't do all this now, then he's not going to have these skills for later.
Right.
And I go back and forth. By the way, I can argue both sides of this, from the one that gives him space and time to be a kid and be playful, right? And just enjoy. And then how do I push him enough? So the question is, like, when am I being too easy on him? And when am I being too tough on him? Because I also don't want to be like, in order for you to be enough as a human, in order for you to get my love and the affection of the world, and for you to make a difference, you have to be killer in all these areas.
Right.
How do I approach that?
Let me ask you something. Did you play an instrument as a boy?
Not really. Like, I mean, dabbled, but not. There's no rigorous. No. So the answer is, I don't know how to play an instrument now. That answers the question.
Is that a regret in your life?
Maybe a tiny bit. When I see somebody sit around the campfire with a guitar, I'm like, that's a skill I wish I would have had. Or you hear somebody that's like, man, I hated playing piano. My parents pushed me, but now I sit and I entertain a room, and I'm grateful that my parents pushed me into it. But that person also didn't necessarily, I recognize they weren't also acting, or right. They weren't developing these other skills.
Right. Did you play team sports?
A little bit, but mostly individual sports.
Right. But did you love them?
When I played soccer at a very young age, I enjoyed it. Yeah. And then later in life, it was surfing, and I did gymnastics for a bit, martial arts. So it was that path.
So look, an educated, ambitious parent can think up 700 ways his child's life might be more enriched.
Yeah.
I mean, I can roll out enrichment. But then I remember my growing up in New York City, and my parents were highly educated and they had the resources. And, I was sent to take drawing lessons on Saturday morning at the Metropolitan Museum of Art down in the basement. There's never been a greater waste of money than my taking drawing lessons at the Metropolitan Museum. Oh, and then my mother had me in classical a Spanish guitar, so I was sort of learning Andres Segovia style. I had zero talent. I also took piano lessons. Now I knew right from the get-go I wasn't much of a team sport guy, because the team sports made me so anxious, and somebody throwing a hard ball at me made me really anxious. But I loved individual sports. I loved summer camp sports. I loved canoeing. I loved hiking. Those things worked for me, but school sports didn't. But as you grow up, you figure out what works for you and what doesn't. But you let things go, and you let team sports go, you let soccer go, and you found surfing. And your life is better for having found that. The idea, though, for ambitious parents watching their kids give up things is sometimes really hard for them, because they're kind of in love with the idea of it, and they want their child to be able to make a commitment to something. So that parents call me and they say, Dr. Thompson, would you let a boy drop out of Little League? He says he's not enjoying it. And I said, well, how old's the boy? It's always my first question. He's 8. How many years has he been in the league? This is his first year. And he's been in how long? 7 weeks? I said, he may think he's given it a commitment. He may actually, that he tried it. He said, and then the parent says to me, but what if he wants to drop out next year? And I said, well, who's going to sign him up for next year? Oh, well, we would. Well, why would you sign him up for something that he dropped out of, and then kind of worry that he's a boy of bad character because he doesn't want to do it? But the counselor I work with at Belmont Hill, a wonderful woman named June Schmunk, said to me one time, she has 3 girls. They're now young adults. She'd taken them all to swimming, and she said, Michael, you're not going to approve of this, I kind of pushed them all in the pool. And I said, did any one of them like it? And she said, yeah, one liked it and stayed with the swim team. And I said, well, that's great. And you let the other 2 get out of the pool and say no. You can't know what your kids are going to like unless you put them in something.
Yeah, totally.
That if you impose your dream, she's going to be a swimmer, he's going to be a whatever, that's you ask them to make a commitment. And for an 8-year-old, a 7-week commitment might actually have been his idea of a full commitment. I tried it, I did it, I'm done, thank you.
I had a friend who said that his deal with his kids is if you start the season, you got to finish the season, but that's it. You don't have to sign up for the next season, which I thought was interesting.
I can respect that.
Yeah. And I think that's also age appropriate, though. Like you're saying, it just depends on what age, which I'm grateful that you asked that question, because I think it is different when you're dealing with a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old and how they view sports or seasons or commitments or teams. I think that is a little bit different. I remember years ago when Tiger, we had signed him up for basketball, and he didn't want to go in. I remember sitting in the car and he was in tears. Like, I'm not going. There's no way I'm going in there. Right. And for him, I know now it's about just not looking bad, not looking bad at a sport or whatever it might be. And I basically strong-armed him into going. I got him to go in, and then he loved it. And he's like, I can't wait to come back next week.
You pushed him in the pool.
I can see moments where pushing him in the pool is the right thing.
Yeah.
And then also recently there was he got offered to do an advanced acting class because he's excelling at that. And he looked at me and he's like, I just don't think I'm going to be able to emotionally handle 2 major roles in 2 plays at the same time. And as much as I like pushing him into things and saying, let's see how this feels, that didn't feel right. Felt like he had really processed that emotionally. I can't just lean on the philosophy of throw him in the pool all the time. I have to use my own better judgment.
Especially as he's developed experience, more experience incidentally than you have of being on stage, unless I don't know something about your child acting background.
Nope. He's got me beat.
Yeah. So when your kid has you beat, you can be curious, you can express some skepticism. Are you sure you want to give up one of these roles? They're both pretty attractive. No, Dad, I can't handle them both. That's the voice of experience. And that's why in Raising Cain, we talk about using a boy as a consultant on his own life. But it also means accepting the consequences of his decision and living with it.
I think that's actually a great transition, if I may use that to talk about that film. And also what I mentioned earlier about violence and boys. I thought this was particularly interesting. You know, and I want to get your take on this because early in that film, you explore the idea of boys playing rough, cops and robbers, acting out. There's the story where somebody dies versus the story where somebody faints, right? And how boys and girls were able to view that very differently. The boys are kind of like, I wanted him to die, and the girls are like, I just want him to faint, you know. And this idea of you know, my question is this: it's kind of rooted in, are we getting too protective of young boys, taking away all forms of combat and hitting and roughhousing? And are we taking away all, like, hey, I don't want you to point your finger and make it a gun, right? Because you're going to grow up to be a violent kid. And I also want to throw in here to the mix, and I'm going to give you kind of free reign to take this where you want, but the idea of the ages and stages. And if you can include in your thoughts, Michael, you know, movies and games, like video games, into this. And so it's an open-ended question. I realize there could be a more refined question here, but how might we as dads be thinking about violence and young boys? How do we start thinking about that?
Okay. So I've been asked all the time over the decades now, by elementary school teachers, what do we do about the problem of violent play? And I say, what do you mean violent play? Well, the boys are using their fingers to shoot each other at recess. And I say, is anybody getting hurt? And they say no. And I say, is it overtly aggressive and frightening? Well, no. Is it consensual? Do they seem to want to play together? Yes, no, they really love the game. And I say, well, there's no such thing as violent play. Play is fun, it's consensual, and I don't care what the themes of it are, as long as the participants are having fun. Violence is meant to hurt somebody, and it's aggressive. Now, what we know is one of the very few biological differences between boys and girls. Imagine for a second the bell-shaped curve of all of girl psychology and the bell-shaped curve of all of boy psychology, and you superimpose one bell-shaped curve on the other. The brains are 90% the same, but where are they different? Boys are more physically active, they're more impulsive, and they engage in what scientists call, and this is the scientific term for it, rough and tumble play. All primate males engage in rough and tumble play. Boys like to wrestle. Boys engage in hunt and chase. They do it to a greater extent than girls everywhere on earth. So if you're going to understand boys, you have to accept that there's going to be more rough and tumble play. But you gave me an example of somebody saying, well, if you pretend shoot, it's going to lead to a life of violence. That is total rubbish. That's completely unscientific. There's no support for that. Play does not lead to violence. Living in a violent neighborhood, seeing gangs operate, seeing domestic battery, but most especially seeing bigger boys, teenage boys or young men, use violence to raise their status in the community, that is compelling for boys. If when you're a 12-year-old boy, you see somebody commit, let's call it a socially successful act of violence, you're drawn to that. You learn from that. That's the way to grow up and be safe and to dominate, is seeing it. So the idea of protecting kids, boys, from their play, and the reason we did that with the Raising Cain film was because that little boy, that little tow-headed boy, Seth, was writing stories about people dying. Actually, there was a killing in one of his stories, and all the kindergarten girls were horrified. But when the girls voted to say you can't have killing in stories, only fainting, Seth said, that's just not as good. It's not as good a story. And when people ask me all the time about why do boys write violent stories, I say, have you ever seen Shakespeare's Hamlet? Many people think of it as the best, most important play in the English language. And the stage is covered with dead people at the end, right? The queen has died, her evil second husband has died, Hamlet has died, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are everybody's dead. And we consider this a great work of art. But with children, we're afraid if they write violent stories, they're going to grow up to be violent. It's rubbish. There's no scientific support for that. It is the stresses of poverty and community breakdown and seeing successful criminal acts that makes kids, boys grow up to be violent.
What's your take on, let's say, the immensely popular game Fortnite? You know, you're on teams, there's guns, there's shooting, like shooting games, video games, and kids.
Okay. There are a number of social scientists who have tried to link video games to actual violence, and they've not been successful in doing so. We know this from research on TV and now research on the internet, that spending too much time in video games shortens your attention span, makes it be harder to focus at school, and there is some uptick in more aggressive behaviors in schools. Schools that give a week off from devices, ask families to participate, they do see a drop in certain kinds of verbally aggressive and challenging behaviors. But the link to adult violence of the kind we all fear has not been established.
If you had boys, if you were me, I'm just trying to paint the scenario that you're my age, you've got kids my age, both boys, would you let them play a shooting game, a video game like Fortnite, assuming you're familiar with that?
Yes, I just would make sure they don't play it through the night. I'd make sure they get sleep. I'd make sure they turn off their devices for dinner, so that they're device-free times in family life. Yeah, no, I mean, you regulate it because
sure,
it's very, very addictive, psychologically addictive stuff. But sure, I'd let them play.
And would you, let's say that they finish playing and then one, like the older brother says to the younger brother, this literally is not it's not my asking for a friend scenario. Right? This is genuinely a question. I think I actually heard this from another person. They were like, my kids played the video game, and then afterwards, one of the kids had said something like to his younger brother, I'm going to kill you. Or I'm going to shoot you in the back of the head. And that to the parent was like, no way, we're done. Like, no more of this. What would be your take on that? Like, in other words, it's like, how much is the game influencing their behavior outside of the game, and when is like the joking around violence okay and not okay?
I'm going to kill you. I don't know how many times my brother and I said that to each other. I have an older brother, 2 years older, minus a day. Boys are competitive. Brothers wrestle and fight and compete with each other. And the phrase "I'm going to kill you," let me come at it a different way. John, this is one of my most asked questions. Is mom saying, "What do I do about my two boys? They compete in everything. They're always roughhousing." And I say, I have a couple of questions. Does one physically dominate the other? Well, one's larger. The older boy is larger. Does the younger brother start stuff? Oh, yes, all the time. And I say, he starts stuff, and knowing that his older brother can hammer him, and oh yeah, he does. So that's a clue. I say, any broken bones? Any stitches? No, no. Any emergency room visits? No. Any broken teeth? No. I say, you're good to go.
Yeah, right.
Leave them alone, because it means the older one, the bigger one, has pulled his punches. He could have really hurt
Totally.
the younger boy, but he doesn't, because he wants the fun to continue in the future. He knows if he's violent and he, in fact, hurts his brother, that he's going to be held accountable for that. So, but the mom doesn't see the restraint. And then I'm going to kill you is, I just, I don't see a verbal expression in a relationship of competition and status, which it always is between older and younger brothers. I don't see that as leading inevitably towards adult violence. Once a woman told me, she said she had an older brother who shot her with his BB gun. And she was horrified. He shot her, I don't know, he shot her in the butt or something with his BB gun. And then he turned out to be, his life's work was nuclear disarmament.
Right.
She was always reminding him that he had once been a different sort of character.
That's funny. That's funny. Looking at the clock, I want to honor our commitment to our time, and I want to at least dabble in a couple of these other subjects, because I think what we're doing is, obviously we're not traversing down the rabbit hole as far as we could on any of these, but I would love to be able to expose our men and this community to some of your work, Michael, and at least get them thinking about these ideas that I mentioned at the very, very beginning. One of which, and that is, we led with this in some ways, or it's my introduction to your work. And I know you're passionate about this, so I want to give you a voice here, is summer camps. Yeah. And, I want to ask the question of, should we send them away? At what age and for how long?
Look, you can't be always hovering over your child's shoulder and then produce an independent child, right? You, at some point, have to open the door and let them walk out. I was talking to a mother once who said, she goes to all of her daughter's soccer games. And I said, yes, but that doesn't always add value to her experience. She said, but we're the kind of family we always go. And I said, yes, but the game is really hers. And it's between her and her teammates and the opponents and the coaches. She said, but we're always there. And I said, I was really annoying to her. I said, at a certain point, kids just like to be able to go and play a game and come home and tell their parents about it. And it's there. When you're there, the child doesn't have full psychological ownership. She has to think about how her mom and dad are seeing the game, what her dad's thinking about the coach. If you go to everything, then your child is never actually truly independent. So the argument I make in Homesick and Happy, and I love the subtitle of that book more than any other book I've written, How Time Away from Parents Can Help a Child Grow. If you think back to your own childhood, and I ask you the question, what's the sweetest moment of your childhood? And I've asked thousands of people that question in audiences. 20% of them say, well, it was Christmas or Seder or something with their parents there. 80% say it was something away from parents, with friends, doing something that the parents might not actually have approved of. That is, taking steps towards independence. I had an Indian woman tell me that her favorite moment in her childhood was when her parents allowed her to fly from India to the United States to see her grandparents on her own and change planes in Europe. And I said, how old were you? This was a long time ago, before the attendance thing that she said I was 8. She changed planes in Europe. And that was her. When I asked the question, what's the sweetest moment of your childhood? It was that sweet moment of independence. So I think those we might like to see every moment of our child's childhood our presence impinges on their independence. And that's why I'm a fan of summer camps. Also, I think every American child should have some period of time away from devices and know that you can conduct your life without devices. And
What
camp,
age would you say parents should start considering this, sending their kids to camp without them?
you start asking kids around 8, and I think by 11 or 12 they should go off. If you wait until 14, by then their social network in town is such that you may have a real fight on your hands. But not from everybody, but some kids. So the prime ages for going away to camp are, to me, 8 to 12.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm saying that because my daughter Joanna went to her first sleepaway camp at 8 and loved it. My son Will, more cautious homebody of a guy, went with a push at 12, and then later went back as a counselor for years. Camp shaped his life to extraordinary extent.
What do you say to the people that respond to the camp concept and they're like, oh, hell no, I'm not sending my kid to a camp. Like, I know what big kids do to little kids. You know, somebody's touching somebody inappropriately. Somebody's, you know, like somebody's making out with somebody when they shouldn't be. Like, what do you say to the stories that may not be so healthy? You know, the camp leader, the camp counselor, all the stories about, you know, the adult making a terrible decision, and you know, then it's like we project that on every camp, right? It's like the fear takes over. How do you respond to parents that don't want their kids to be put in situations, and maybe because they experienced some type of trauma as a child? I'm gathering that's part of it, or they know somebody, or they just heard a news story. They just heard.
Yeah, no.
Right?
And whenever I talk about camp, their moms would come up to me and they kind of start to cry. Are camps really safe? And I say, you're worried about child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Every camp director I know is absolutely obsessed with hiring and supervising healthy people who will not abuse or psychologically or be cruel to children or molest them. Now, people can slip through that net. We know that 10 to 15% of kids experience some sexual abuse in their childhood, and that's terrible. But let's be honest, it's mostly in families. It's mostly from relatives, and it's not from camp counselors.
Yeah, that's. I mean, yeah, that's. I've heard the same thing, so I'm appreciating the validation for what the story is, that I believe that to be true also. So the message is, don't let your kids spend time with family, is what I'm getting. No, I'm just kidding.
all categorical remarks.
Just kidding. You've done a lot of work, excuse me, all through the US and all over the world. Deep work in the camping community, right? The kid camp community. I remember reading in your book, Homesick and Happy, that maybe your only regret was that you didn't have more time, more years to go visit more camps, right? And because there was just so much, you know, interesting, there are so many interesting stories and approaches and traditions at all these different camps. Yeah. Are there parts of the country where there are more camps than others?
Well, the East Coast is big on sleepaway camps because it kind of started to get city kids out, you know, and still there's the New York Times Fresh Air Fund and the idea that you should get kids out. Also, there have been religious camps in this country. Someone once told me that there was research, I have not read it, but I believe it, that Jewish summer camps are more influential in cementing kids' ties to Judaism than attendance at temple. Mm-hmm. And so there are many religious, there are many evangelical camps. People have different agendas for camps, but my agenda is growth and independence and development, because what I hear from parents is when they send a child away for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, the child comes back with new friendships, new respect for a counselor, a desire to be a leader herself when she grows up, a desire to go to college, and she has the independence to support her being an independent college student. When people say, what's the best preparation for college? They usually mean academics. And I say, no, it's summer camp.
Is there a,
I believe that.
yeah. Is there a Yelp for summer camps? Is there a place where somebody can go, type in their zip code, see all the camps, the ratings, the reviews?
Oh, yeah. American Camp Association has a website like that. And you can put in your region, and if you want a tennis oriented camp, and you can do all of that with the American Camp Association.
Awesome. That's great. And when a parent's thinking about sending their kid away, what should they be considering?
Whether they trust the camp director.
Yeah.
Because what you need when you send your child away from you is to know that the person who's running the organization is trustworthy and picks good people. So the most important conversation is between the parent and the camp director. And a parent has a good feeling. That's why just picking a camp online is not the way to go. It's that call, because look, you're going to let your child sleep away from you, right? Change their clothes away from you, be with other kids for hours and hours away from you. You have to trust that there's a good environment. But what I don't want parents to be doing is to send a child away and then be sending anxious emails to the camp office every day saying, please deliver this to my child. Please deliver this to my child. That doesn't add value to the child's camp experience. And I'm quite annoyed that so many parents are doing it these days. I think if you make the commitment to let a child go off for 2 weeks, then you have to support their independence by not constantly needing to interact with them.
One last quick question around this. And again,
Sure.
this will kind of round out what we seeded in the beginning, this tension between parent and teacher. This is the parent who's so hyper involved. And I've wrestled with this because it's like, on one hand, I let go of control and I'm like, I have no idea what my son's doing at school. I have no idea what the schedule looks like. I'm just hands off, right? Like, trust the teacher, let it happen. I'm like, that doesn't feel good either. And then there's the when I start asking too many questions, well, what happens then? And how are you handling this situation? And what's your policy for discipline? But I think some of that's smart. Like, do you want to know if your teacher is spanking your child or not? Yeah, you probably want to have some knowledge around that.
Yeah, you sure do.
But how much do I want to be controlling? And speak to the parent-teacher relationship, if you would, to kind of round us out today.
Jon, I ask audiences to imagine that you're in 10th grade. So you're 15 again, okay? Fall of 10th grade. What percentage of your day, your school day, does your mother know about? Put a number on it.
What percentage?
What percentage of your day?
0.05, 1%, right. Maybe?
Yeah, many people say, I tried to make it 0, so my mother knew nothing about my day. But usually people say 10, 15, 20% of my day, my mom knew something about, right? And then I asked this question. If your mom had known twice as much about your 10th grade day, would that have made a difference in your school career?
Interesting. Probably not.
Almost everybody says probably not. Probably not. By that time, it was mine. So parents need to know a little bit more about the kindergarten day, and they ask, and kindergartners tell them. As children grow up, 9, 10, they start telling them less, right? And by 14, they usually are annoyed by their parents knowing too much about their day, because it makes them feel that their parents are treating them like little children.
Yeah,
that they're competent. So I'm going to tell you a story about Teddy, and I'll wrap it up with this. I was once giving a talk at Concord Carlisle High School from my book, The Pressured Child, and a mother brought her 9-year-old son. Whenever I see a 9-year-old brought to what's going to be a 90-minute parent talk, I go over and ask the child whether he or she has a device, encourage them to play on it. They shouldn't be there, but I make a contact with. So this little boy, and I asked his name. His name was Teddy. I said, Teddy, can I ask you a question if the grown-ups need to hear from you? He said, sure. So I got to the point where I was talking about why children don't answer the question, how was school today? Which I call the most asked, least answered question in the world. I said to Teddy, does your mom ask you every day how school was today? He said, yes. And I said, what do you tell her? He said, I tell her, it's good or it's fine. I was looking at his mother's face, and her mother's face got all sad. I said, Teddy, don't you see that makes your mother sad? That you don't tell her more about your school day? And I said, why don't you tell your mother more about the school day? And he looked at me, this third grader looked at me with this kind of, are you sure you can take this, Dr. Thompson? I said, no, please, we are all, well, no. I said, why don't you tell your mother more about your day? And he said, there's not that much she can do about it.
Right.
But I thought, that's right, Teddy. You have to go live out third grade.
Yeah.
And your mom can't really change your destiny in third grade. That's on you. And you know it at age 9. And it's humbling to be a parent. We'd like to do more, and we'd like to imagine that our knowing more could really change their day. I don't believe that it does. In an emergency, in bullying, in a terrible mismatch between a child and a teacher, yes. If a kid's been put in the wrong section and it's not working, yes, there are things that should take you to school. But just knowing everything about your child's school day doesn't really change their school journey.
Yeah. Michael, thank you so much for being our guest today. Thanks for your work.
I had a lot of fun. You said we were going to have fun, and I had fun.
Yes, this was great. 50 years of work in this field, 10 books, an immense amount of resources for men to go connect with you further and dive deeper into the areas that we began to explore today, where they might say, that's one, right? I want to go watch Raising Cain, the film that's now maybe 22 years. Yeah, it's 22 years or something, but I still found it very insightful. It doesn't even, it's like, to me, that's timeless. The conversations, the topics, the boys, what was being explored there. Homesick and Happy, other books that you've written. I hope people will go check out your work. And men, if you've enjoyed this interview, please send it to another man who is attempting to raise great boys. And I think they may find this insightful as well. Michael, one of the things I want to reflect to you as we say goodbye right now, and I'll keep this quick because I know we're a couple minutes past our time, is that I just wanted to say thank you for modeling curiosity and questions today. Because not only did you talk about that, but you actually demonstrated it in each of the topics that we dug into, was how you might ask questions to people and how you remain curious. And I just really appreciate that piece, because when it comes to the men I respect the most, it's men with great wisdom, but that are still curious enough to ask questions and not make a lot of assumptions and not jump to conclusions, but that to be in research mode and to be listening, right, along the way, as much as we're sharing the stories and the wisdom that we have. So thank you for that. I appreciate you being here.
You're very welcome, John.
Is there anything you want to say to the men out there about where to connect or anything else? Final words from you?
Yeah, when you're raising your children, enjoy them. Worry less, enjoy them. Kids are resilient. And there are too many people today talking about kids as if they were all fragile. There are some fragile kids, and all kids have fragile moments. But generally, kids are very, very resilient and on the road to independence. And enjoy that. Watch it, support it.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate you being here. Gentlemen, thanks for listening today. And Michael, I look forward to another conversation, hopefully down the road.
I would look forward to it too, John. Call me back, okay?
Thanks.
Take care.